A psychiatrist named Dorian drives to the middle of a dark bridge to negotiate the release of his daughter, Calliope, from someone who kidnapped her. Even though he can't see clearly through the fog, he tells the person at the end of the bridge to release his daughter since he has convinced the Grace family to move to the town and live in the Spiderwick estate just like he was told.
Where's my daughter?
Just then, Calliope runs toward her dad, but as he sees her, he notices that she looks different. Dorian complains about this, but instead of arguing, Calliope smiles and confirms his suspicion.
Wrong question.
Before Dorian realizes what's happening, a giant troll drags him out of the bridge and kills him. Following this, Calliope tells a monster named Mulgarath that since Dorian has been killed, he can now take on his identity. Surprisingly, the monster walks out of the dark as a new Dorian, and he tells Calliope to now refer to him as her father. He also says he's happy that the Grace family is on their way because he'll now be able to find the field guide of a man named Arthur Spiderwick. The next morning, a lady named Helen Grace stops at a gas station with her children so they can buy whatever they need for their trip to Henson, Michigan. While one of her sons, Jared, seems to be taking too long inside, his sister, Mallory, and twin brother, Simon, complain about having to relocate to Henson because of their brother, who has oppositional defiant disorder. However, Helen tells them to be supportive because she believes she has finally found someone to help Jared. Shortly after, Jared leaves the supermarket, but a sales representative follows him and accuses him of stealing a chewing gum. Jared immediately denies this, and Simon also says that even though he knows his brother is troublesome, he would never go as far as stealing something. Just then, the sales rep leaves them alone.
Sorry.
And the Grace family continues their journey to Henson. On the way, Jared and Simon start speaking in a special twin language they formed. Since Mallory can't understand what they're saying, she tells them to stop talking, but the boys refuse to do this. As they keep talking, Jared then confesses to his twin that he stole the gum from the store.
As you believe, gangster.
And Simon looks shocked and disappointed because his brother had no reason to steal the gum. After a while, the Grace family arrives at their ancestral home called the Spiderwick estate. After they enter the house, they see a tree in the middle, and Helen mentions that the tree is a manchineel tree that was planted by her great-grandfather, Arthur. She adds that the fruits from the tree are called death apples, and they were used by indigenous people to ward off evil spirits. However, she eventually says the fruits are poisonous, and that if the kids ever see a fruit on the tree, they should remove it and toss it out. Shortly after, the kids go around the house, but they don't seem to like it as much as their mom, who says she used to enjoy playing there as a kid. Since the relocation is coming just after her recent divorce from their father, Richard, who is still staying in Brooklyn, Helen tells them that she knows how hard it must be for them. She also mentions that they won't be disturbed by anyone in the house because her Aunt Lucinda no longer stays there due to her mental illness, which got her institutionalized many years ago. Helen then mentions that her kids already know all of Lucinda's stories about magical creatures and her little boggart friend named Thimbletack, which she used to tell them about.
Having mental health issues isn't a fault.
However, she mentions that Lucinda's main problem was believing that these creatures were real. That night, while the others are sleeping, Jared hears a strange sound and follows it around the house. He eventually picks up Mallory's fencing sword and tries to stab whatever is moving around, but he only finds one of Arthur's drawings of a creature called an ogre. Elsewhere, Dorian and Calliope head to the house of the real psychiatrist they got killed. While they're inside, a neighbor named Stacy comes around to ask if they've seen her cat. Calliope seems particularly interested in eating Stacy, so Dorian tells her to go away. Calliope doesn't seem impressed by this because Dorian promised her a feast when they were moving to the town. However, Dorian tells her to be patient because his plan is to kill all the people in Henson after obtaining some dragon seeds, which can put the entire town to sleep. The next morning, Simon notices that his mice are missing, so he starts looking for them. Jared then suggests that whatever was moving around the house the previous night might have taken it. As he also mentions that he almost stabbed it with Mallory's sword, Mallory gets pissed and sees that her sword is now broken. She then blames Jared for this and suggests that he likely did something to Simon's mice because he never liked them. Before they start an intense argument, Helen gets Mallory to calm down.
I'm not hungry anyway.
Jared then suggests buying some mousetraps to catch the mice, and Simon agrees. On their way, they see a small fairy door on a building in the middle of the town. As Jared sees the door, he remembers the drawing he saw the other night and tells Simon that he's starting to think Lucinda was right about ogres and other fairy creatures being real. However, Simon says it's impossible.
Something about this place feels dangerous.
Elsewhere, Mallory goes to a fencing class and tries to get a teacher named Valentina to take her in, but the lady rejects her and says she's not good enough yet. Mallory is shocked by this because she was a top fencer in Brooklyn, but Valentina still maintains her stance. Meanwhile, Helen sees a fruit grow out of the tree inside the house. As she plucks it, she remembers how Lucinda taught her how to make manchineel tea by mixing it in a clockwise direction.
Stir with your forefinger,
So it can be used to ward off ogres. Later that day, Helen takes Jared to the hospital to join some kids who are part of Dorian's therapy group for mentally ill kids. There, he meets a girl named Emiko and a boy named Hatcher, who has a helmet on after being diagnosed with body dysmorphia. Jared eventually leaves the room and stands outside Lucinda's room after seeing Helen inside. Even though Helen keeps talking about her kids and recent divorce, Lucinda doesn't respond. And it turns out that she has never spoken a word since she was institutionalized many years ago. However, as Helen mentions that she has moved back to the Spiderwick house with her children, Lucinda gets furious and warns her to leave because there are dangerous creatures around. Helen is shocked by this, but before she can do anything, the nurses enter the room to subdue Lucinda. Meanwhile, Dorian takes Calliope to a local museum. Even though it's against the rules to touch anything, Dorian tells Calliope to eat one of the objects inside there. As she does so, she spits out a dragon egg that was concealed inside the object. Later that night, while the Grace family are having dinner, they hear a loud sound inside the walls again, so Helen suggests tearing down that part of the wall to see what's there. As they do this, they see that it's a wall covering a dumb waiter with different mouse traps inside. This shocks the family, and as Helen leaves to call someone who can fix the wall, she tells the kids to clean the house. Instead of this, Jared suggests climbing inside to see where it leads.
Come on, we have to go up there.
However, Simon refuses to do so, and he says he doesn't understand why Jared likes doing unnecessary things. He then walks out and joins a group of people at a firefly festival in the town. He eventually finds a firefly and chases it down to catch it. After he then texts his dad, who says he can't talk because he's in the middle of a rehearsal for a play. Simon takes a closer look at the firefly and notices that it's something else. As the jar holding the creature falls, Simon is left shocked because he doesn't want to believe he just saw a fairy. Elsewhere, Jared starts cleaning the floor and suddenly hears a sound inside the wall again. He then decides to climb up to see if there's anyone there. When he gets to the attic, Jared finds Arthur's old office and sees several weird things inside. He also sees Arthur's portrait and his field guide, with all the pages torn out. Just then, he hears someone moving nearby, and as he looks around, he sees a writing on a mirror telling him to watch his back. As he looks back, Jared sees Thimbletack and immediately runs downstairs out of fear. He then tells his family that they need to leave the house like Lucinda suggested. However, Mallory believes he's only craving attention, and Helen doesn't believe him either. While he's trying to convince them to believe him, the chewing gum he stole from the store falls, and Helen realizes that he actually lied about not taking it. Following this, she says she'll take him to meet his new psychiatrist immediately. Elsewhere, Dorian tells Calliope that he'll need to find the field guide to get more information on how to raise the dragons. In the meantime, he cuts himself and feeds his blood to the dragons. Just then, someone knocks on the door, and as Dorian checks who it is, it turns out to be Helen and Jared, who are there to see the psychiatrist. Dorian welcomes them in and agrees to speak to Jared while pretending to be the real psychiatrist. However, Jared doesn't seem interested in the session, especially because he believes the man is indulging him by asking about the creatures he thinks are inside the house. Since Helen already told Dorian about the drawing Jared saw, he asks for it, but the boy refuses to give him. Elsewhere, Lucinda prepares the manchineel tea and drinks it. While Dorian and Jared are still talking, Calliope brings them some food. However, as Jared looks at her, she suddenly changes into Lucinda for a second before changing back. As he wonders what he just saw, Helen comes in and tells them that she just got a call that Lucinda is missing.
Lucinda's missing from the hospital.
Just then, she heads home to see if her aunt is there, but when she doesn't see her, she leaves with Dorian to join a search party led by a man named Tanner, while the kids stay back with Calliope. Shortly after, Simon, Mallory, and Calliope meet Jared inside Arthur's office, watching a video in which their great-grandfather tells Lucinda that magical creatures are real. Mallory still believes he's fooling around.
You put in an extra grate.
But as he mentions the field guide with torn pages, Calliope looks uncomfortable. After a while, they hear a strange sound in the wall again, so they decide to set traps around the house to find whatever it is. Simon and Calliope seem to get along well, but Jared doesn't seem to like her. He then tells Simon how she changed to Lucinda, but his brother doesn't believe this.
Which would mean you're not crazy?
Elsewhere, Lucinda goes to the town's supermarket and finds a guy named Hubert, who happens to be another magical creature who takes her to a place called the Goblin Market because she needs to purchase something. Meanwhile, something triggers one of the alarms inside the house, so Jared goes to check and only sees the drawing of the ogre on fire. When he also discovers that the camera didn't catch the person who did it, Jared runs over to tell Simon, but before he can say anything, he sees that his twin brother has found his dead mice inside the fridge. Jared immediately uses their secret twin language to tell his brother that he thinks Calliope did it.
I think it acted as E.
But Simon doesn't believe this. As he walks away, Calliope seems to understand what they said, so she looks at Jared angrily before heading out too. While Simon then buries his mice, Calliope stays with him and tries to make him believe that Jared killed them. However, Simon says he doesn't think Jared would do something like that. After a while, Jared finds a reflection of the person who burnt the drawing in the video, so he quickly finds a way to sharpen the blurred image. Surprisingly, Jared is then exposed as the culprit, but he says he didn't do it. However, since no one believes him, he walks away. Shortly after, Simon goes to meet Jared to complain about how he has to always deal with his brother's problems. Just then, they hear a sound behind the wall, so Jared goes to check it. Luckily, he finds a secret entrance, and as the boys enter, they see Lucinda in Arthur's office. She immediately tries to hurt Jared and Simon because she doesn't know who they are. However, she leaves them alone because both boys don't react badly to having an iron pointed at them, as they wonder what she means. She mentions that fairies don't like iron. Jared then asks about the field guide, so Lucinda mentions that it is a catalog of all the creatures Arthur ever found. However, she says that since the information inside the book was too valuable, she had to tear all the pages and hide them around Henson before she had her memory wiped so that Mulgarath would never use them to take down all the creatures in the town. Following this, she tells them that the pages are hidden in different places, marked by protective totems called Nazars, and that they'll need to find all the pages and save the creatures. After a while, Lucinda sits downstairs,
And it will all be my fault.
while waiting for Helen to return home from her search. She then gives Jared a seeing stone, which she purchased from the Goblin Market. As Jared asks what it is, Lucinda mentions that it's the key to everything, and that he must save everyone and get help from Thimbletack too, as she adds that he mustn't trust anyone.
That's why you can succeed.
Helen returns home with Dorian. Simon almost tells Helen about what Lucinda told them, but Jared stops him. Since Dorian is her doctor, Helen tells him to take her back, and he happily agrees. While they're inside the car, Lucinda then tells Dorian that she knows he's Mulgarath.
And I knew it was you, Mulgarath.
She also says Calliope must have been the one who framed Jared for burning the drawing. Calliope confirms this by showing that she's a shapeshifter, and after a while, Dorian stops the car and asks where the field guide is. She then tells him that she had her memory wiped to keep him from ever getting the answer. Since this makes her useless to him, Dorian stabs her with Mulgarath's sharp finger. But Lucinda only laughs as she turns to a flower that scatters around the woods. That night, Dorian feeds the dragons again after removing them from under the ground, which is where he has kept them to ensure they infect the soil and water pipes around the town. The next morning, the Grace family organizes Lucinda's funeral with her sister and Helen's mom, Melvina, also present. After the funeral, Melvina hears Jared talking about Mulgarath and Thimbletack, so she tells Helen that she needs to leave the house and take the kids back to Brooklyn. Dorian comes in while they're talking, and after a while, Helen tells him what her mom said. However, since he doesn't want her to leave, he tells her that she can come to his office later for advice.
Maybe we should talk.
That night, Dorian then goes to dig up Lucinda's grave, and it turns out that he actually made Calliope change into the old lady because there's no other way people would believe that Lucinda died. The next day, Jared serves everyone in Dorian's therapy group with cookies baked with iron, and as they all eat some and complain, he realizes that none of them are fairies. However, Dorian realizes what he did and calls him into his office to scold him.
Come on, my office now.
After Jared then refuses to talk about the magical creatures or the field guide, Dorian dismisses him. Following this, Jared agrees to meet Simon at the building with the small fairy door they saw the other day because it has a symbol of a Nazar. Before Jared arrives, Calliope shows up and convinces Simon to leave, and he eventually follows her on a walk. Meanwhile, Jared arrives there and tries to unlock the door alone. While he's at it, Hatcher and Emiko see him and they offer to help. Even though he rejects their offer, they still stick around until Jared uncovers some hidden letters on the door. Elsewhere, Mallory goes to Valentina's class again, but she meets a student named Bree instead. As Mallory then complains about Valentina not agreeing to teach her, Bree tells her that if she wants to impress the teacher, she needs to improve and sign up for an upcoming competition. After she and Mallory then practice together,
Look back at it.
Bree goes outside to take a call. Mallory then sneaks into Valentina's office and sees a picture of her with Lucinda. As Mallory looks curious, because Valentina looks exactly the same in the old picture, the teacher arrives, so she hides behind a cloth rack. Before she can look around, Bree shows up and mentions that Mallory came back. Valentina then tells Bree to keep Mallory on her toes and be brutal because they need to be ready for an upcoming fight. Meanwhile, Calliope tries to make Simon hate Jared, but he says he can never leave his brother. Together, they then head back to meet Jared,
A isn't a Roman numeral.
who is disappointed that Simon told Calliope about the secret doors. Simon says she's not dangerous, and she also tries to prove that she means no harm by helping them decode the words on the door as music notes. She then seems to be uncomfortable with the iron on the door, so she decides to leave. Almost immediately, the boys discover that the notes are for Lucinda's favorite song, and as they sing it with Hatcher and Emiko, the door opens, so they pick the first page, which shows a boulder. Hatcher recognizes it and says it's located at a nearby lake. They then go there together and look through the hole in the boulder, only to see two unicorns playing around. Jared also discovers that, aside from the unicorns being visible from the rock, he can also use the seeing stone to spot fairies and other magical creatures. Meanwhile, when Dorian learns that Helen still wants to leave, he successfully manipulates her into changing her mind. Shortly after, Dorian hurts Calliope after realizing that she didn't wait to get the first page the kids found. Elsewhere, Mallory arrives home and tells her mom about the competition she wants to sign up for because she thinks Valentina and Bree are up to something. Helen supports her daughter, and she also says that she has changed her mind about leaving. Melvina doesn't sound happy about this, and she decides to leave the house while saying she hopes Helen's kids don't become delusional like Arthur and Lucinda. Just then, Jared suggests going to find Thimbletack, and Simon agrees. However, Thimbletack hurts Jared's arm, and he's immediately taken to the hospital. While he's being attended to, Simon sees Calliope in the hospital, and he tells her that he knows she's not human. Calliope is shocked to hear this, but Simon says he knows it because he saw how she reacted to the door. However, he says he'll keep her secret. Elsewhere, Dorian goes into Jared's room to see how he's doing. As he tries to talk about what happened,
What's the story with the arm?
the psychiatrist picks one of the cookies on the table. Jared then tries to tell him not to eat it because it's one of the bad ones made with iron, but it's already too late, and this exposes Dorian as Mulgarath, leaving the boy shocked. The next day, Dorian seems quite nervous because Jared already knows about him. As he's talking to Calliope, Stacy knocks on the door, and when she enters, she complains that whatever Dorian planted in his yard has affected the water supply and made her pets fall ill with sleeping sickness. He then convinces her that it's not his fault, and as she's leaving, Dorian sees that Jared has painted his door with a beware sign. Elsewhere, Jared and Simon finally capture Thimbletack. Shortly after, Emiko and Hatcher visit them, so they head to see Thimbletack together. As they then talk to the creature, who seems to be stubborn, he says that he believes Lucinda is still alive and he needs to find her. Jared thinks the creature is just playing with them, so he keeps it caged.
Lucinda is dead.
After he leaves, though, Simon frees Thimbletack so he can find Lucinda if he's really sure she's alive. Shortly after, Bree visits Mallory, and while they're in her room, she asks about the picture she saw and why Valentina doesn't like her. Bree says Valentina likes her, but that she thinks Mallory seems too uptight. To fix this, she suggests hosting a party at the house, and Mallory agrees. Elsewhere, Tanner leads some of the residents in the town to protest against having the psychiatric hospital around. He says that if Lucinda could escape, then the people in the town might not be safe from the other patients. Dorian confronts Tanner for this, and things eventually get heated when the psychiatrist insults him and blames him for killing his wife. Tanner punches him for this, but Helen is there to help him. Meanwhile, Simon shows Jared a video of Arthur talking about an elf circle, which he was hoping to use as a passage to the elves' kingdom. He says it's where Thimbletack believes Lucinda is staying, because she made a trade in the goblin market. Jared still doesn't believe Thimbletack.
It's so obviously a trap.
But Simon then shows him a map that the creature gave him, leading to 4 other field guide pages. Following this, they decide to split up to find the other pages. While Simon goes with Hatcher, Jared chooses Emiko. After a while, Calliope shows up to meet Simon at the location of the page he's looking for. She then asks why he hasn't been answering her calls, and he says he didn't know Mulgarath was her father. Calliope denies this.
He's not my dad.
And she tells him the story of how fairies used to live in the town before humans came and built things that hurt them and chased them away from their homes. As they keep talking, Calliope speaks the secret twin language, and as Simon wonders how she knows it, she says it's actually a fairy language. Just then, Hatcher sees Calliope, but doesn't know she's with Simon. As he then scares her, her hand hits an iron, and it hurts her. So she eventually leaves. After a long day, Jared and the others return to the house. While they're wondering what to do next, Simon tells Jared that he has been able to translate the language Arthur used to write the information about the elf circle. Jared looks confused and asks how he managed to know that their secret language is also a fairy language, but he says he just thought of it. Just then, he translates the text and uses some items to create a spell. Surprisingly, the spell works, and even though it affects the power supply, it summons a fairy that suddenly flies away. Jared immediately tells the others to lock all the windows, and as they do this, he finds the fairy and smashes it with a frying pan. Simon is unhappy with this because he believes he could have caught the fairy. As he insults his brother, Jared punches him, and he walks away. Before Jared can follow him, Hatcher shows him that Emiko is now unconscious. Meanwhile, Mallory asks Bree about what Valentina talked about the other day. Bree then says she can't talk about it because she's not ready to know about it yet.
Well, I can't tell you about that.
Almost immediately, Mallory sees Simon leaving, and as she tries to stop him, he says he's tired of always having to deal with Jared. He adds that he hates their family and wishes he stayed back with Richard in Brooklyn. As he walks out, Helen comes in to ask Mallory what happened. Before she says anything, the light comes on, and she sees several kids lying unconscious on the floor. She immediately calls an ambulance, and when it arrives, it turns out that all the kids are actually in a deep sleep. Shortly after, Mallory enters the house and finds Bree resurrecting the fairy Jared near killed before letting it fly away. Elsewhere, Calliope brings Simon to meet Dorian, who looks happy to see that the boy will now be staying with them. The next day, Calliope convinces Simon to head back to Brooklyn to see his dad, and he agrees. As they're about to enter the bus, Simon sees Calliope change to the bus driver for a few seconds before changing back, and this surprises him. While Helen, Jared, and Mallory are worried about where Simon went, Dorian comes to the house to report that Calliope is also missing. As Helen then welcomes him in to join their efforts to find the kids, Jared suspects that he knows something. After a while, he discovers that Dorian is at the house to find the dragon page of the field guide. Mallory offers to help because she now believes magical creatures are real, but Jared says he doesn't need her help because she has never truly cared for him. With Thimbletack's help, Jared eventually finds the page and hides it from Dorian, who has now made Helen fall for him. Elsewhere, Simon asks Calliope why she turned to the driver, and she says she can sense impending death. Following this, Simon realizes that the bus driver will die soon. After a while, Simon goes to check on Richard at his supposed workplace, but he learns that his dad has never worked there. He's left disappointed by this, and as he wonders what to do, Calliope suggests meeting a magical creature named Zhao because he can help them. Simon agrees to follow her, but when they meet Zhao, he doesn't seem to like Calliope. However, she still asks for his help to get away from Mulgarath because she's scared of who she might become with him around. Simon then realizes that she had other reasons to visit Zhao, who now has plans to kill them. Luckily, they manage to escape. But Simon says he can't follow Calliope anymore because she lied to him. As he's about to walk away, he sees her turn into Jared. Simon looks scared and asks if Jared is going to die, and as Calliope confirms this, he looks disappointed. Shortly after, he finds Richard and hears him talking to Helen about how Simon is a needy boy who always disturbs him with texts and calls. Simon confronts Richard about this.
What the hell are you wearing?
And he also learns that his dad has always lied about where he worked. Richard tries to say sorry for this, but Simon just walks out. Elsewhere, Mallory goes to meet Bree and Valentina to get more information about everything happening in Henson. Valentina refuses to tell her, but as she insists, the teacher says she'd tell Mallory all she needs to know if she scores a point against her in a match. She also offers another option to help Mallory forget everything she now knows about magical creatures. Mallory chooses to fight, but unfortunately, she fails to score a point. While she's then resting, she remembers what Jared told her earlier, and this makes her sad. After she returns to meet Valentina, she says that instead of forgetting about the magical creatures, she would prefer to forget her hate for Jared because she has always hated him for constantly stealing their parents' attention when she's in the spotlight. Interestingly, Valentina scores her a point for this, and as she says she'll tell Mallory everything she needs to know, she removes her gloves and reveals that she actually has no hands. Elsewhere, Simon prepares to head back to Henson. As he gets to the bus station, he sees the bus driver about to be hit by a car, so he saves the man's life. When he then enters the bus to meet Calliope, Simon asks if it's possible to save Jared too. Calliope says it's possible, and as he then asks if he can trust her, she tells him to try. Meanwhile, Valentina informs Mallory that they need to find the Vorpal's sword and use it to kill Mulgarath. As Mallory asks why she has never tried to do it herself, she says that she once tried but lost her hands in the process. She also mentions that it's why she's now training Mallory and Bree to kill the monster. The next day, Simon meets Jared at the hospital, where he's trying to see if he can wake Emiko from her deep sleep. Jared doesn't look happy to see his brother, especially since he's now living with Dorian and Calliope, despite knowing that they're responsible for the sleeping sickness spreading in the town.
Give me one reason why I shouldn't punch you in your dumb face again.
Simon tries to explain that Calliope is his friend, but Jared walks out angrily. When he gets home, Mallory tells him and Hatcher to help her find the Vorpal's sword. Even though Jared initially refuses, Mallory convinces him to change his mind. Just then, someone touches his shoulder, and he suddenly gets a vision in which he sees Lucinda telling him where to find the Goblin Market, because that's where they can get the Vorpal's sword. Elsewhere, Helen takes some clothes to Simon at Dorian's house. Even though she tries to convince him to return home, Simon doesn't seem interested in talking to his mom because she also lied to him about his father's job. After a while, Dorian and Calliope show Simon the dragons. As he then asks what they want with the field guide, Dorian says he wants to use it to protect all the creatures. He adds that he presently needs the dragon page so he can save the dragons from dying, so Simon offers to help him get it. Meanwhile, Jared leads Hatcher, Mallory, and Bree to Hubert's store. After they meet him regarding what they want, he takes them to the Goblin Market. He then puts breadcrumbs on the way leading to the market so they can find their way back to the store. After walking for a while, they eventually get to the market, and he fetches the Vorpal's sword for them. However, he says he'll get his payment in teeth. Jared and the others are shocked by this, but he then remembers another vision he had in which Lucinda mentioned that Hubert is a chronic gambler who must be tricked in order to get the Vorpal's sword. Following this, Jared pulls off a few tricks and snatches the box with the sword, after which he and the others redirect the breadcrumbs so that Hubert won't find his way out. Elsewhere, Simon goes to find the dragon page in Jared's room, but when he doesn't find it there, he decides to climb up the wall to reach Arthur's office. Unfortunately, Thimbletack sets up some traps for him, and he gets stuck. Meanwhile, Tanner continues to fight for the closure of Dorian's hospital, so the psychiatrist poisons him with his fingernail. After a while, Tanner starts growing mushrooms in his mouth, and Dorian appears and turns him into his puppet so that he can drop the case. Later that day, Jared and the others arrive home, only to meet Simon stuck on his way to Arthur's office. Thimbletack immediately tells Jared that Simon is no longer on his side, so he tries to stop Mallory from helping their other brother. Mallory still saves Simon, but as Jared checks the sword box, he sees that there's only a sword handle there.
It's just a hilt.
He then believes Mallory sent him to the Goblin Market as a distraction to help Simon steal the dragon page. Mallory denies this, but Jared still mentions that everyone is against him. Hatcher says he's his friend, but Jared says he can't believe him until he takes off his helmet to prove that he's not a monster. Hatcher refuses to do this, so Jared forces him and hurts the boy in the process. As Mallory and the others scold Jared for being a bad person, Helen and Dorian arrive to see what he has done.
Jared, what did you do?
Jared then tries to tell his mom that Dorian is a monster, but she doesn't believe him. After Dorian advises her to get him committed to the hospital, she agrees and signs all the necessary documents. While he's then heavily sedated in his room, he sees Lucinda telling him to stay strong. Elsewhere, Calliope looks sad as she tells Simon that one of the dragons has died. Shortly after, Bree and Mallory take the sword handle to meet Valentina, who says it's actually a test. She then tells both girls to hold the sword. As Mallory holds it, nothing happens. But when Bree collects the sword handle, the blade appears. Mallory is shocked by this, and as she asks why Bree is the chosen one, Valentina suddenly starts growing mushrooms on her face, and she becomes a puppet too. Meanwhile, Dorian keeps disturbing Jared for the dragon page, but he refuses to give up where it is. One day while he's in his room, he sees a fairy who points him to look under the mat to find Lucinda's manchineel tea recipe. Before he can do anything though, he hears Emiko's voice through the vents near his room. He's happy to finally see her awake, and she also says she's okay. As she then mentions that Dorian has been asking her about a dragon page, Jared tells her not to worry about him. The next day, during their session, Dorian brings in Helen, Richard, Mallory, and Hatcher to read Jared a letter they wrote for him. They sound quite disappointed in their letters, and this makes Jared sad. When he returns to his room, he tells Emiko about it, but she suggests that Dorian might have shapeshifted into his family members to make him feel sad. Jared believes this, and as Emiko asks if he's sure the dragon page is safe at the Spiderwick estate, he says it's not even there. The next day, Jared sneaks into Dorian's office and sees Simon, who immediately asks about the dragon page.
Where's the dragon page, Jared?
Jared then insults Simon and says that even though his brother likes pretending to help people, he's the real hero because he's the one who saved Emiko. Simon says their friend is still sleeping, but Jared doesn't believe this. As he then says he can't trust his brother, Simon walks away, and Dorian comes in to reveal that he actually manipulated Jared into telling a fake Emiko that the dragon page is not at the estate. Following this, he tears Jared's bandage and he sees the dragon page, which makes him happy. Elsewhere, Simon heads home to find Thimbletack, but Mallory stops him from getting too close because they believe he's a traitor. However, Simon shows her that he already has a cure for the sleeping sickness, and he's there to help. Meanwhile, Dorian invites Helen for dinner at his house. When she enters, though, she checks the fridge and sees some severed fingers inside a plate. As she looks shocked, Dorian appears to her and accuses him of being a monster.
Jared was right.
He then confirms this and threatens her, while saying they can talk about it during dinner. After a while, he takes her to the supermarket to get some food items, and while they're done shopping, Dorian poisons the cashier to become his puppet. Shortly after, Mallory helps Jared escape from the hospital, which is now surrounded by Dorian's puppets. When they finally get to safety, Jared sees that Mallory is with Bree and Hatcher. Jared quickly says sorry to Hatcher for what he said the other day, and his friend accepts his apology. Just then, Simon joins them. But Jared is shocked because he doesn't trust his brother anymore. However, he eventually changes his mind when Mallory mentions that Simon actually stayed close to Dorian so he could find a way to prevent Jared from dying. Elsewhere, Dorian gives Helen the dress she'll be wearing to their dinner date. He then goes to meet Calliope, who is preparing for the dragon to hatch. As they talk about their upcoming feast, they hear a knock on the door, and it turns out to be Simon, who has brought Jared to meet Dorian, who is happy about this. Simon also reports that Mallory and the others have sneaked into the house, but this appears to be part of a plan to stop Mulgarath. After a while, Jared is taken to meet Helen, and she says sorry for not believing him.
No, you tried to warn me.
Jared then mentions that he understands her, but he also adds that she's the only one who can save them. Elsewhere, Calliope notices that Simon is working against Dorian. He then tries to convince her to work with him, and even though she initially refuses, she eventually gives him more of the antidote. Shortly after, Helen and Jared head out for dinner, but before Dorian joins them, the boy mentions that he needs his mom to remember how to stir the manchineel tea based on Lucinda's recipe, because Thimbletack has already made the tea. As Dorian then comes in after they're served a drink, which turns out to be the special tea, he says he has a plan to turn Jared into a puppet to make him controllable. Before he can force Jared to eat his food, though, Helen remembers the recipe and they both drink the tea and suddenly disappear, leaving Dorian shocked. Elsewhere, Simon takes Calliope to the woods so she can speak to the fairies and convince them to help defeat Mulgarath. Meanwhile, Lucinda suddenly appears to Jared and Helen, and she says she has been the one helping them. She also says it's good that they all now believe Jared because it's important that they stick together. Before she then leaves to return to the fairies, she tells them to continue to believe in themselves. Shortly after, they leave to enter the house and find the field guide. Thimbletack then tells them that to kill Mulgarath, they'll need a big monster like the troll under the bridge. As he says that, Jared will have to learn how to summon the troll by reading the page inside the field guide. He says he can't read it like Simon. However, Helen tells him to try, so he says he will. Meanwhile, Dorian finds Mallory and draws out a sword to kill her. Luckily, Bree sneaks up behind him, but he eventually knocks her to the ground. Bree suddenly loses her connection to the sword, but luckily Mallory is now able to draw the blade too. She then fights Dorian, but as he almost overpowers her, Helen helps her daughter by spraying Mulgarath with an iron potion. Shortly after, Jared finds a way to summon the troll, and as he does this with Mallory and Helen, Dorian shows up again and says he can't be defeated. After fully transforming into Mulgarath, the troll suddenly drags him through the window and takes him away. Jared and the others then see the fairies flying around to spread the anticode to cure the sleeping sickness. As everyone gets better, the Grace family returns inside to see that the dragon egg has hatched. Jared then suggests killing it before it becomes uncontrollable and dangerous. However, his family thinks the dragon deserves a chance. Jared still insists that the dragon should be killed, so Mallory passes him the Vorpal's sword. Interestingly, Jared appears to be worthy, so he's able to draw out the blade. As he's then about to kill the dragon, he remembers how his family stood by him despite being stubborn. Following this, he decides against killing the dragon, and his family are happy with the choice. As they then hug each other, another Jared shows up and claims that he's the real Jared. Helen and the others are confused by this, so Simon suggests using the Seeing Stone. However, Calliope says it won't work because it's likely an illusion. Following this, the new Jared touches an iron blade to prove that he's not hurt by it, so Mallory is told to stab the other Jared. Just as she points the sword at him, he disappears, and the family hugs each other again with the new Jared, who turns out to be Mulgarath because his hand actually got hurt when he touched the blade, but no one knows. After a while, Jared suddenly finds himself in a different realm. As he then looks around, he sees Arthur offering his hand to help him stand up.